taken an email from Doretta, and it has in it what the scripture will be for the following Sunday, what her quote at the beginning of the bulletin will be, and sometimes a couple of notes about her message, maybe just the title or maybe a theme. And then I get to see, okay, what songs go with this? And sometimes I read the scripture and I say, wow, nobody wrote a song about this one. This was one of those weeks. We'll get to the scripture and you'll see. There's some songs for Psalm 19, but the passage from Isaiah, oh boy, but a vineyard factors heavily in it. And not a pleasant situation in a vineyard. And it made me think of that line in the Battle Hymn of the Republic about trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. You know, okay, this is something. And then I looked at this quote at the beginning of our bulletin, a spirit of lament is where we must begin if we're to step toward healing. And that took me back to that same thought. I've shared a little bit of this story before, that the poem that we call the Battle Hymn of the Republic was written in 1861 by Julia Ward Howe. Julia was a activist and a writer. She would go on, she lived a very long life. She was instrumental in the women's suffrage movement. She was a fierce abolitionist, anti-slavery. Her husband was also a progressive thinker and writer of the times, and unfortunately for her, her husband was progressive in all of his views except for a woman's role in the marriage. So he was very unhappy with her most of the time for what she was writing and publishing and being an activist about. But she didn't care. She even said at one point, you know, if my husband's upset with what I'm writing, then I'll keep going. And she gets a little bit lost in translation with the Battle Hymn of the Republic, because this is a song that really became associated with a militant attitude. And even in its time, some people thought that this was glorifying the idea of a holy war, which is not an attitude that we really want to cultivate. And, you know, who are we to say what side of any political disagreement that God is on? But again, something got a little bit lost in translation when you look at the woman behind the words. The song, the poem for the song, grew out of some traveling. In 1861, she was in Washington, D.C., and passing by in her travels several encampments of troops. And they were singing a marching song, as they often did in their rehearsals, and these marching songs often did not have very uplifting words. And this one that they were singing that she heard went something along the lines of, John Brown's body lies mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on, and they, you know the rest, right? And somebody said to her, one of her traveling companions, said, you know, if they're all going to sing that tune anyway, you should write some more uplifting words for it. So she filed this thought away, and in the night, she had what she later described as a dream or a vision, something that she didn't quite remember, but she sat up in bed in the hotel where she was staying, and this idea of these verses to that rhythm, to that tune came to her. And she wrote them down in the night and then went back to bed, and she really hadn't remembered. She was sort of half asleep, or maybe you could say in an inspired state. And she wrote, Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory. And what she later described was that she had a vision. And it was a vision of a world that was ruled by justice and by equality. And all of these ideals that her work espoused. And she thought, well, that would be a vision of God's world. And that was really the inspiration for writing those verses. Now, of course, it immediately became associated with the military because that's what was happening at the time. She sold her poem, Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory, to the Atlantic Monthly for $4. And they published it on the front page of the next edition. I believe it was actually October. And the editor gave it the title, The Battle Hymn of the Republic. Not her title. So, already from the beginning, her vision of a place of justice and equality and being on the right side of history, peacefulness, if you will, was taken away by an editor. So I thought I would just share a little bit of that story today, and we'll sing the hymn at the end of the service. I like to find some of these things in history and contextualize them and take them back, if you will, especially a situation that we learn of now far too often. We have an information age here where we've been able to find that a pattern of a woman writing something and a man misinterpreting it, and then there writes history. So I thought I'd share a little bit about that today, and a little bit about Julia Ward Howe, and I wouldn't mention the editor's name or her husband's. So when you hear the song Battle Hymn of the Republic, you can think a little deeper into the story and see that land of justice and equality, and you can see her penning these words by the lamplight that she talks about in one of the stanzas.